Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday, and welcome to Restoring Our Roots podcast, the voice of the Decriminalize Nature movement. This podcast is a gathering space where we explore the wisdom of entheogenic plants and fungi, the beauty of natural healing, and the importance of reconnecting with sacred earth. Twice a month, we'll hear from visionaries, healers, and advocates who are working with entheogenic plants and fungi, exploring realms of consciousness, and returning us to a balanced relationship with nature. Keep in mind, everybody, this is our last episode for season 3, and we won't be back again till fall. So enjoy this one and catch up on all the ones you missed after this. My name is Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Decriminalize Nature and the national organizing director. I've been lucky enough to help support teams all across the U.S. I think 31 cities and counties now going strong with a decrim-like policy, which is fantastic. Yeah, over 11 million people now live in a decriminalized area. So if you want this to happen in your location, please give us a reach out at decriminalizenature.org. We have a whole setup for you. We help to train you on how to talk to city council members and give you the resolution to work with and how to analyze their city council and how to organize community, et cetera, et cetera. So we'd love to help you out in that. So please contact us. And also on that same page, if you want to give a donation to help us continue with the podcast and other things for the movement, please go ahead and donate at the donate button below as well. Also like to introduce Rachel, who's really a big part of our podcast process here, doing all the productions behind the scenes there. So thank you, Rachel, for all your help. As always, we couldn't do this without you, and we're excited to be starting season 4. Rachel is also responsible for making sure that if there's any questions or comments in the chat box, she'll go ahead and answer those or ask those to us at the very end. So if you have a thought or a question, or Ellie, you just want to say hello and send some love, please go ahead and put something in the chat box, and Rachel will sum that up for us towards the end, about 10 minutes to the end of the program here. So really excited about that. Also, about a week or two, maybe let's say a month, because it's summertime here. Look for these episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcast platforms. We have quite a few on there as well. I think I don't know how many, 20 or 30, 40 episodes I think currently are on there. So check those out if you haven't, and look for the new ones. Subscribe and get more information on that in the future. I'm really excited to have our guest today, who is Allison or Allie Thomas. Allie was a student of mine at the Star King School for Ministry for a first ever Masters of Divinity psychedelic chaplaincy at an accredited university. So they're pretty much breaking ground there, which is really impressive. I was very stoked to have all of Allie's wisdom in the class. Obviously, you've done so much work, both in your sort of professional life, but also in just how you're thinking about it in personal life and things like this. So it's really great when you have somebody that has a full context for all this type of work, because it is so nuanced and so complex, and oftentimes the answer you think's in front of you is not always the answer you're getting. So I even love how you're playing with some of the elements in the sort of the trickster realm. We'll talk about that a little bit, as well as being a festival clown and other things. But it's not often that I get to read a bio piece by piece here. So I'm going to do that for the joy of our audience and myself as well for you. So give me a second here. Allie Thomas is a pagan interfaith chaplain, circus performer, and fire entertainer who has spent nearly 2 decades at the crossroads of psychedelic culture, spiritual practice, and grassroots activism. She is completing her Master's of Divinity at Star King School for the Ministry, where she is part of the first cohort ever to graduate with a concentration in psychedelic chaplaincy in fall 2026. Immersed in transformational experience communities since 2009, Ali has co-facilitated programming inside prisons for over a decade, produced and performed at festivals and events across the country, and was named Fire Entertainer of the Year in 2022. Fantastic, good job. She's a harm reduction advocate and peer support practitioner, a student and organizer in the reclaiming tradition of witchcraft, professional tarot reader, and a 6-time Burning Man participant. She also, obviously, we're talking about psychedelic chaplaincy, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the class as well. But psychedelic chaplaincy is a natural extension of nearly 20 years of eclectic, expansive work across spiritual community, harm reduction, peer support, performance, and activism. And Ali is excited to be part of this new, yet entirely not new wave of psychedelic spiritual care. And that's kind of what it feels like out there. So it's really, really glad to have you as an experienced person in that world. So how are you doing today, Ali?
Yeah, thank you so much, Larry. Yeah, I'm doing great. It's really awesome. This is like my first time getting to speak on a lot of these topics and kind of like come out of the psychedelic closet, as it were, with my school projects and the endeavors that I've been working on for quite a while now. And yeah, working with you in our psychedelic history class has been such a highlight of my career in school so far. So when you're like, "Hey, do you want to be on this podcast?" I was like, "Definitely." Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. So tell us a little bit about how you got here, how you sort of found your way to psychedelics and the festival scene and clown work and all the things that got you here today.
Yeah, well, I always say it kind of started back in my little baby hippie days, is what I call them. Back in when I was, 18, 19 years old. I was just smoking weed and hula hooping and dancing to jam band music. I'm from the East Coast originally. Grew up in Vermont. My family still lives there. I still go and visit all the time. So we had a really rich music scene there and just kind of got into it. And I felt the pull from the West Coast, a little East Coast started to feel a little small for me. And I started one day I packed up my car when I was about 21 and I just started driving west. And I was just like, I know there's other stuff out there. I had a couple of friends and just started driving up and down the West Coast and live in different places and trimming, doing the whole like, that kind of underground trim scene while it was still really good back then. I've been reminiscing on those days recently with some new friends about how all that worked back then. And so yeah, kind of just started going to more and more festivals and more music, and I started hula hooping and met so much circus community out here. Really kind of like embraced me and enveloped me. And in particular, the Oregon Country Fair was kind of like my big, like solid foundational ground that really just embraced me and kind of like brought me up into being a wonderful, wild psychedelic culture human. Like and they have roots with the Grateful Dead. That's kind of how they got their whole start. That's how, they had their big concert that allowed them to purchase that land. And so I perform there and I've worked there a lot too for like over like 13 years now or something like that. Anyway, yeah, kind of once I kind of got settled in Portland, that was when things kind of really took off for me especially in terms of the spirituality piece. Like I had always been very witchy. Like I had an aunt growing up who gave me my first tarot deck, and she kind of like spell books and things like that. So I always kind of had that sort of spirituality. Grew up in a very liberal household too. We went to the UU church when I was a kid, actually, like here and there, which is kind of how now I'm like in the UU seminary too. As you said, I'm a pagan interfaith chaplain, but UUs are just so beautiful. It's a really interesting religion. It's like so eclectic. All kinds of people find themselves there. But yeah, I started taking different classes here in Portland. They're so rich here with all the different types of ways to experience like pretty much anything you're interested in, especially counterculture wise. So I started getting involved with the reclaiming tradition, which is an anarchist, eco-feminist witchcraft tradition, came out of the 70s of like second wave feminism. If you're familiar with the work of Starhawk, she was one of like the main founders of that. So here in Portland, I joined the organizing cell. I became like a part of like creating community ritual here. And then at the same time, I attended around the same time I started doing that, I attended this what was it? It was called the Northwest Magic Conference, and it was a really beautiful weekend of workshops, witchy kind of all things witch. There's like a really amazing marketplace there, and through that I took a workshop with this amazing person named Rhea Wolf, and at the end of the workshop I was like just blown away by we did Joanna Macy's work that reconnects. She was like very into that. And I was just blown away, and her style was amazing. And at the end, she said, "Oh, and by the way, y'all witches, like I run a prison group at the Coffee Creek Women's Correctional Facility, and we're looking for more members to come help." And I don't know what it was, but I was just like, yes, like I just want to do that. And so I plugged in with her doing that. I think it was like 2016, and instantly loved it. And it became such a part of my practice and like a grounding force in my life. And I learned so much about facilitating groups and my own spirituality and leading like spiritual endeavors with a bunch of people. And then also just, I didn't know that I was doing it then, but providing spiritual support and spiritual care, chaplaincy at that time. At the same time, still being a part of the circus community, of the festival community, and music scene, and getting into harm reduction advocacy and consent education at the time. So all of these things were kind of percolating in my life and sort of moving forward. Always finding myself as like party mom, kind of like being in the scene and like someone's having a tough time, and like always kind of finding myself gravitating towards just like sitting with them, helping them, and then also like having my own experiences where people really stepped up and helped me too. And sort of all of these things kind of coming together, and then eventually fast forward, I'm like full on professional circus entertainer at this point in like 2019. And I have my first full year set up of like, I'm going to get all my gigs paid from just purely performing. And I was just like so stoked. And then the pandemic hit and like COVID and all of that. wiped everything out, and I was just like, obviously, as we all were, very shocked. Um, and I got involved in the protest, the BLM George Floyd protest here in Portland, pretty heavy for a while there, and through that, kind of experienced like, how are we going to make this world work? Like, what's going to happen, and what is my place in it? And really just had these big existential kind of reckonings. And I found myself supporting someone very close to me through like a really intense acid trip that they were like really not okay. And it was actually back home in Vermont. And they kind of like came to a point like, we were in a graveyard next to my family home, and I like watched these like clouds go over the moon. And I just knew, I like had sat with her for so long, and I was just like, this is what I'm supposed to do. I was like, I'm supposed to like be with people in their time of like crisis and intensity or whatever it is, emotion, grief, big feelings. And because I was finding myself doing that like on the ground in the protest, I was finding myself doing that in the music scene, and in all these different places, like being just a kind of space holder and in that way. So I started looking towards like options, like what's going to happen. I started doing classes at PCC and like mental health care. I got my peer support specialist training. Um, and then I took a class at Star King just as a special student, not even as an audit, not even as anything, just like purely just like, just let me drop in and take this class. And it was called The Sacred and the Substance. And it was about psychedelics and spirituality and how they overlap through history and culture throughout time. And it was taught by Aize Jama Everett. And in that class, he basically took me under his wing, and he was like, we need your energy in this field coming forward. You have just this like, you know, on the ground, like in the culture kind of experience that so much of this new wave of psychedelic renaissance like does not have. It's like full of all these amazing therapists and like, people with doctorates and things like that, but like the experience that you have is very unique. And he just kind of like helped me go through. I don't actually have an undergraduate degree, so Star King admits like I think it's like 5 or 10% of their incoming class, like with just based on experience. But because of my harm reduction and because of my work in the prison and all these other things, and a really glowing letter from Aize. Thank you, Aize. I don't know if you're going to see this, but um, I entered the school and I entered into their Master of Divinity program. And this was in like 2022. I've been going very slow, taking my time because, still managing a full-time performing career and traveling and doing all these other things while I complete this degree, because he knew that the psychedelic program was going to be a thing at the school, but it wasn't announced. There was no word about it. But he's like, if you go start now, you'll be in the first group to like have this. And so that was a really good tip from him, and he really guided me. I'm super grateful for that. And yeah, I've just been in it now, and the psychedelic program has changed. At first, it was a concentration in psychedelic justice and companioning, but
Mhm.
now it's a actual full psychedelic chaplaincy Master of Divinity program. I believe it's what it's gonna like end up being. So that's kind of like the long, windy road that I got to be here with you now. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Wow. I mean, what a story. And I think, right on with what Isaiah is saying there about how important it is to have people that are in the culture that understand how this is really happening in real life. It's not like, oh, we've created this like, fake scenario where there's a room with all the qualities are perfect. You're like in it where people are like, survival of the fittest to some degree. It's like all the intensity, very much kind of like you think of like the electrocholic acid test where it's just like bombarding with a lot of external activity. And then how does that person make their way through that, and you're holding space in those scenarios where it is kind of the most, not saying chaotic as is like a bad thing, but there's a lot of things that like kind of maybe can turn an experience in a different way. You understand kind of jargon and ways of thinking and paradigms, and just how what it's like to be in the underground, which is such a different experience than the above ground, so to speak. And so yeah, I hope that people will continue to step out from these different places into the larger community where they can do a lot of support and a lot of help, because it's needed when you have a lot of opportunists who don't maybe, oh, I had one experience and I kind of have a sense of it. And you're like, oh man, you maybe need to have some more. So having your wisdom in that space to say, hey, there's a lot more here. Here's what I've learned from experience, I think is really critical right now. And hopefully policymakers and people in positions of power will understand that and not keep doing this gatekeeping thing. That's one thing with Decrim. We're kind of like, hey, everyone should be involved and learning from each other, where these other models are like, oh, you need to have a license to do this thing. But, you have probably, years of lived experience that, or 3 or 4 PhDs comparatively to some people who have, some of these other credentials. So really thank you for being on board with that. There's a couple of things that you said in your bio that I was kind of curious about in general, and I know I touched on this in one class, but I don't know, you might have touched on a little bit, but now we get a chance for you to unpack it. Kind of grew up in the East Coast, saw the East Coast jam band scene and the psychedelic scene out there. Spent a lot of time traveling up and down the West Coast, so not just a specific area of the West Coast, but the West Coast thing as well. So there's seems like there's an East Coast West Coast vibe in terms of psychedelics. How would you differentiate them? Would you see that there's a difference? What would you say? Because they're both very stuck in, people I talk from the East Coast like, yeah, psychedelics here, blah blah blah, and people West Coast, blah blah, But like, how do you see, having sort of lived both of them, the differentiations between those?
That is an awesome question. So in general, I'm a pretty like bi-coastal person. Like I spend a lot of like in a year every year I go back to the East Coast and I have like still a ton of community there. And the just an overall vibe general like aside from psychedelics, what do we say? It's like people on the East Coast like act really mean, but they're actually really nice, and people on the West Coast like act really nice, but they're kind of judgmental like underneath it all. And I kind of see that in these worlds as well. Like the West Coast is very like has a lot of like very fluffy and very like we're all like kind of new agey woo woo sacred kind of thing. But then in the scenes that I particularly am drawn to, you kind of touched on it before but like the clowniness and the playfulness is really is present in the psychedelic world out here. People are very willing to like take the bit to the end of the earth out here. Like they will just riff forever, and people are very witty and poetic in the scene, I find. And that trickster energy that we were talking about too is like really, really strong on the West Coast, I find. It's much like more grandiose, where I feel like on the East Coast it's just like grittier in general, I think, which kind of has like a very like real, authentic feeling, like I think that there's a lot more focus on music and like interpersonal connections. And I think that also kind of goes into just something else I feel about the East Coast too, is that like communities are smaller and tighter, and there are a little can be a little bit harder to like get into, but because it's just the East Coast has been like developed longer than the West Coast in general. So like the communities there have been longer. The people have their like their bubble and their space, and like this is who we are, and this is how we live. We're on the West Coast. I think people are a little more like open, and they're like want to know about like what you got going on and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I could talk about that forever, but there's there's definitely a more like closed versus open vibe on East to West Coast, I think.
I
But they're both
imagine
so rich. It's true.
I
Mhm.
imagine the West Coast also is so used to transience that it sort of forces an openness to it. There's always new people coming in, and sometimes it happens on the East Coast, but I imagine more so on the West Coast, where there's that sort of transient nature that happens. I know, when I was living outside of Detroit, kind of north of Detroit area. Same thing, the party, the techno scene out there was such a different vibe than it was here on the West Coast. It's like black hoodies in the dark. You don't, no one's do colors or anything. You wait in line, you get in the party, you party till sunrise. Same thing, all about the music, all about the small knit communities, not really about being sort of flamboyant and extra and colorful and all that kind of thing. It's like really focused, and to see here, which is sort of a different feel. And I think what you're saying kind of draws in that sort of clowniness. When you see, I mean, it seems like you have a lot of different areas that kind of overlap,
Mhm.
and spirituality and chaplaincy and clowns and prison complex and harm reduction and all these kind of things. They all have this there seems like there's a thread between all that. But I think the thread that is always curious to me is like this trickster clown element within psychedelics and even within spirituality, outside of even psychedelics and spirituality. Could you maybe speak to this trickster thread that kind of flows between all of these, and why is it needed and necessary, and what benefits does it have?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about this a lot as I was kind of drawing these same threads for myself, being like, all right, what is I'm going to be graduating in the fall here, so I'm really trying to kind of lace it all together and pull it together. And what is it? And I think that the trickster really embodies that as an energy for this thread, because it is the unknown, and it is the element of like anything can happen, anything is possible, and what you think is one way is suddenly not that way. And I think being able to hold that type of archetype and to be able to understand it and work with it and dance with it and have it as part of your life kind of lends you to be brings a sense of like malleability and a sense of able to kind of handle anything, and not take things too seriously as well, like not to get too embedded and stuck in your ways. And I think that that's exactly what psychedelics do, right? They kind of like give us that sense of malleability, that sense of like breaks down the rigidity. And I think that the trickster energy really exists to do that, like to come in and just like fuck it all up. Just like you think it's going to be this one way and it's actually not. And that's like the comic relief, but it's also like the chaos tragedy, right? And it's like that's one thing I love about the trickster is it has that whole gamut. It's everything and it's nothing at once. And I really see this in the through line between psychedelics, between holding space, in the prison, holding space in hospitals, like doing crisis work, doing all of this stuff where you're in a moment where everything like it's just like high intensity, and so they kind of all go together in that way. And like holding space for like someone who is having like who's on their psychedelic journey on a trip or whatever is so similar, I have found, to holding space for someone who is like in the depths of grief. I did 3.5 months of a clinical internship in chaplaincy at UC Davis Health in Sacramento, and it's a trauma one hospital there. And so I really got to experience and be with people on like the absolute worst day of their life, like the things like awful, horrible things that no human should ever have to experience, but unfortunately, it's very real. And the type of energy that I felt with them in those moments was really shocking to me because I felt it so similarly to when I've been with people who are just like absolutely losing their entire mind, like on psychedelics and having a difficult trip in that way too. Um, and so I think that, yeah, it's this energy of just like, yeah, anything can happen, anything is possible. And yeah, what you thought was one thing is like absolutely not that. And being able to just like be with that and not get too stuck in your ways, I think is like the big through line here for me. Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's such an interesting, and I studied a little bit of transformation for my dissertation, and part of this idea of this sort of quantum change or like quick sudden change that happens at the core of that is this idea of surprise. And so
Mhm.
laughter is surprise, humor is surprise, trickster element is surprise. Oftentimes grief is caused by something that was surprising, so this element of like being able to sort of play with this moment of surprise, this moment of transition. Like you say, you don't know what to expect next. You can't really predict what's going to happen in the future. Hey, here I'm ready to go, and boom, the pandemic happens, and all of a sudden now I can't do this. What else am I going to do? So all these different types of ways that we kind of go do through transformation. How did you sort of prepare yourself, for other people out there that maybe want to sort of follow a similar through line as you are? How did you prepare yourself to be able to hold space for a surprising, intense moment like that?
Yeah. I, I've always kind of thrived in chaos. Like I grew up I went from being an only child to being a mixed blended family of like 7 kids, like throughout my life. And so, had a lot of changes. I moved around a lot as a kid too. And I really feel like that kind of lent me to being able to just be quick on my feet and really able to adapt to like any situation and figure out what the vibe is and how, for better or for worse, honestly, like how can I fit into and like fit into this energy into this like vibe or whatever it is. And that's really carried me. So being able to just be comfortable while everything around is going wild, and that's really the role of the chaplain too, is I feel is to just be that strong like lighthouse while the whole ocean of chaos of emotions and grief is like happening around. You're kind of like the post person there. And I do feel like psychedelics really taught me that a lot, like being in a situation where it just seems like absolutely insane, especially in the festival world where so much is going on around you all the time, and you add in the psychedelic experience, like really brings a strength of the spirit to be able to withstand like so much energetic and like just like stimuli, like input, and being able to still stay strong and still, retain some sense of composure like, in a way. So, yeah, I don't know. That just that element of being comfortable with the chaos, I think, is a really good way to prepare and to know if this is like maybe a path that you want to go on. Is like if you thrive in that, great. Hmm.
And how do you find yourself? Because I know obviously you're taking on a lot in those all those scenarios. what ways do you sort of ground afterwards? Do you have sort of a process following some of these big intense experiences that you're helping others with?
Yeah, I definitely lean into my pagan spiritual teachings with that. I love visualization. I really love the placebo effect. Like, huge fan. Like we can have the effects of something without the, actually having to take it in. I'm like, that is great. So I really feel that. But what's funny is, with these all of my like pagan witchy practices, I am consistently like humbled around again because it's like it actually works surprisingly, So with that, I love my tree of life grounding. I love doing my visualization, dropping down your energetic cord into the earth, connecting with the earth, throwing it up to the stars, connecting with the stars, pulling that energy in, and kind of using it as like I call it like a spiritual HVAC system, where like you kind of run that energy like through your aura and just let anything that's not yours kind of like fall away. There's a couple other different practices I use, like different types of like almost like like an energetic sieve, kind of like allowing like a screen with like smaller and smaller like diameter like holes kind of going through, pulling away anything that is not meant to be there. I also just love jumping in a good old body of water. I love swimming. Just getting, jumping into the river here in Portland. We're so lucky, like around, it's just like so easy to just go over to Dabney and just like, whoosh, okay, quick little like energetic reset. Yeah, those are some of the things that I do that I find really, really make a difference and really help.
It was wonderful, yeah. And you mentioned something there that I always probably I don't know if I've soapboxed on other podcasts, but I do in general about the placebo. And I think you really touch on something that's over and over again is kind of missed, which is like, wow, there's this thing where our mind can do this thing that makes you heal if it thinks strongly enough about this thing. Wow, like that in and of itself suggests something really powerful about the mind and about our interaction with consciousness and about healing and health and wellness. And yet in the sort of medical model that we're used to, it's considered an anomaly and it needs to be sort of taken out of the studies, and it's complexity because you can't sell it, of course, that type of thing. But and I've even heard some people saying that maybe some of the benefits of psychedelics across so many ranges is that it opens up this sort of personal hypersuggestibility, if you will, where like almost like internal placebo effect is happening, where the power of the, or whatever you want to call it, I don't want to dismiss it by saying placebo, but the power of the mind is such that all of a sudden people are healing in all these different ways that they had no idea about before. And so I really appreciate that you sort of brought that in. What do you see in terms of the healing effects of psychedelics and sort of, I won't say placebo, but the power of the mind to shift things when you see all these results, all these studies that are happening right now for depression, for anxiety, for PTSD, for substance use issues, how do you see the healing mechanism? Is this spirit even? Is it mind? Psychology? What are you kind of seeing it as?
Yeah, I really see it as um, creating more connectivity in the brain and the spirit, and being able to feel things more deeply and increase like just general sensitivity to energies in general, and to have a better connection with one's like inner self. And I think that connecting, like the more we can do like any kind of like deep introspective work and to get to know ourselves better is always going to lead to some kind of amazing healing. I think that our current paradigm and society, as it were, does everything that it can to keep us from being connected to ourselves, because when we're connected to our own spirit and our center and our core and our power, like we're much less controllable and much less profitable. So, I think that psychedelics really bring that home. I think that they really kind of strip away a lot of things and kind of just break you down to the core sometimes, and you just kind of are left with like, this is who I am, this is what I got, and I've just got to move forward with it in whatever state it is. And kind of gives a uh an encouragement in that way. And also just, yeah, being able to be like, I think like you said, hypersuggestibility, but also, yeah, being more open to very strange and maybe more woo-woo kind of topics and spirituality. I found in myself and people around me, is like when they have started to be interested in psychedelics, and like, oh, this whole world just opens up of like new types of ways of thinking about like, themselves, the earth energies, their spirit, and things like that, which I think leads to more healing as well. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I noticed you've said it a few times, and I've actually been sort of finger wagged by some of my friends for using the word woo too much to talk about real spiritual ideas. But there is this kind of like even in sort of this Western model we're in to almost in a way dismiss before we even talk about what it was. So when you say woo for those out there, how would you like could it be something that you really find is like okay, this is super considered super woo, but is effective every time I see this happen, the results happen that I expect it to be.
Yeah. I was kind of talking about it before, but I constantly go back and forth with my spiritual practice. Like sometimes and I think this is also the trickster energy of not getting too stuck in anything. And I think this is the reason I like to use the word woo is because it kind of allows me to not take it too seriously. I think that we get into trouble with anything where we start to um, get too stuck in our ways and things like that. And a lot of the unfortunate types of like spirituality that I've encountered, especially on the West Coast, but it's global, of like gurus and things like that, people who want to take advantage of others, who are like seeking healing, seeking things like that. They kind of come in and be like, this is the only way, and this is the way, and so I feel like the word woo kind of allows like a little bit of a space of like, yes, this is like very good, but it's also like we take things with like, like a lightness, we're not trying to dive like, super hard into it. But then I always get humbled because I start just being like, yeah, this is good. And it's like, and it might be working or whatever. And then some kind of really crazy magical thing will happen. And I'm just like, oh my God, this
Mhm.
shit is real. Like, oh my God, like, I was leading like for just one example, I was leading a pagan psychedelic integration group at our previous community psychedelic center here called the Rhizome. No longer open, but such an incredible experience to be a part of while it was here in Portland. And I was leading a group there, and we, locked the door. Everybody who's here is here, and I'm casting our circle, right? I'm casting like our magic circle to hold our space for our work for the night. And I cast a circle and it's great. And I say out loud, okay, the circle's cast. And, only energies that we invite into this space now are allowed here. And everything else is just outside and we are protected in this space. And as soon as I said that, the doors, someone starts banging on the door, like, like super loud, trying to like get in. And we're like, whoa. And then I was like, it was just so ironic because like I just said, like, we have a solid wall here now. Only the energies that we allow in here are here. And we're like, whoa. And I was like, well, I guess maybe somebody wants to come in here. I go up, open the door, nobody there.
Wow.
Just like, absolutely. And I was just like, strong container. Okay, cool. Here we go. Like, let's get into
Right.
it. And so then it's just like things like that, or, different like spell work or things that I've done in the past where I'm like, this is good and it makes me feel good in the moment, then like actually turns out to work. And, just like you're saying, we don't really have a why and a how, but it's like, it's just continually shows me that, like, yeah, it totally works. So, I think that's where like the word woo and that kind of comes in. It's because, never want to take things like too seriously, like this spell is going to heal my whole life and like things like this. Like I'm not trying to do that, like it does have like really strong benefits to, use visualization, to do meditation, be connected, to have a practice, just something you're returning to all the time. Um, yeah, I think that's why I revert to that word woo, is because it kind of just keeps that sort of like malleability that I keep coming back to.
Right. And it's quote unquote on brand for you as well, because woo would be kind of like the trickster thing, right? You're taking and you're poking holes in something, which is like, again, like you say, this guruism that can sometimes happen, which can be kind of cultish. You see those things potentially happening out there as well. Just because I think that's an interesting thing. And I've even heard this, we've gone to the East to talk about spirituality and therefore have this guru model. But when we're talking about plant medicines, it's more of a shamanic or for lack of a better term, shamanic model, which isn't quite the guru model. So people are expecting a guru model approach to a different kind of framework. So how do you sort of see both how do people ground or sort of be aware of like, okay, this is sort of something I need to be watching out for in terms of guru, maybe it's too much rigidity or other things like that. And then how do you sort of help people sort of navigate in a world that is more fluid, less guru, more sort of you're going to be in it and try and figure your way out of this and there is that more of that trickster element, so guru versus shamanic or trickster, how do you sort of see those playing out?
Yeah. Well, I think my first advice that I always give to folks who are trying to explore their spirituality and whether it's with plant medicines or anything else like that is anybody who's telling you this is the one and only way, super big red flag right off the bat. And like that seems pretty obvious, but it's really interesting how people, especially people who are really yearning for a change, for healing, like they will, I've done it at different times in my life too, like find the person or the school or the class or the methodology and just get like super married to it and just like this is the thing. And I think that just in general in life, whenever we cling too hard to something that we think is going to save us or change us or anything like that, that is the biggest red flag and biggest flaw in that like more guru model. You know, this is like, here's the person, they're going to give you everything you need. When what I really believe and what I have seen like what, that actually has results is like, you are the person that is going to save you. You're the only one who can like heal you ultimately, you know?
Mhm.
And so in my chaplaincy and in my tarot reading, I read tarot professionally for events and parties and things like that. And in I always say in my readings, especially, it's like my whole goal with them is because people are like, "Oh, are you gonna tell me like when I'm gonna die and like you're gonna do all like what's gonna happen in my life?" And I'm like, I do not want to know all that, and actually neither do you. Like what I really want to do with this reading and with this like what either spiritual navigation or whatever it is like I want to know how we can find your most powerful self. Like how can we like connect you to like your like highest best like most awesome path and your spirit and your energy. And so kind of always giving the power back to the person is like and like helping like kind of directing them towards like doing their own spiritual sleuthing of like what it is inside of them that's going to give them this thing that they think that they need, you know. And a lot of times that comes into that comes with like really just looking at the shadows and really going into those like the dark scary places. And I think that that is what my work as a chaplain, as a psychedelic guide as it were, or whatever kind of work I'm doing in these various places is like just being with people so they can like do that work and have someone like nearby that's like holding down the fort so they can kind of just go into it. Is the biggest thing. So not trying to direct their experience, not trying to fix or tend, which is actually really hard. And especially in the hospital, oh my gosh, like really was that's my biggest challenge and biggest learning. And when I do my year-long residency, that's just something I'm going to keep going back to is not trying to fix anyone, not trying to like jump in and with solutions and solving and things like that, and just sort of letting things unfold as they are and as they like letting people kind of have their process without trying to rush it along or push them. And I think in a lot of uh, new age, like the woo woo spiritual, there's a lot of like, this is what you need. You just do this breath work every day. You just do this, da, 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 and like you're gonna be healed. And then you can be a coach, coaching coaches just like me for like, $777 a month, like whatever. And like people get into those places that I'm just like, okay, like what are we doing here? So yeah, returning the power to the person, I think is the biggest one.
Yeah, imagine especially in really difficult situations, working with somebody who there really is no like I had a friend of mine that worked at a children's hospital for cancer patients, and so she was saying, in those scenarios, there's nothing really. There's you can just sit and be compassionate and hold space for the person to share what they're thinking, but to kind of go in those other spaces really turns people off. So I imagine that is quite a because you naturally want to help, but
Yep.
sometimes the best help you can do is just sit and listen. And I imagine that is kind of a difficult place to be in for somebody that's navigating these worlds as you are.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's like all the, especially, the type of clinical internship that you do with chaplaincy is in a cohort. And, it's like all of us in all of us in the cohort and in the school in general, it's like we're all there because we want to help people, right? Like we're drawn to that. We want to see people succeed and help them heal and do that. So to be in some of those particular spaces where there's just nothing to be done, absolutely, except just be there, it is just so hard. And, but it also is it's really rewarding. And I think one of the most like embodied way that I kind of found it was I found myself instead of going into a situation with a client or with a patient or whatever where and like leaning forward and having my energy like here like okay what are we gonna do, it's like just a constant. I would just remember okay, no, lean back, like sit back, like let the things unfold, like let them happen in front of you. You don't have to like be ready to, what are you going to say as your response? What are you going to, it's just like, and that's like the deep listening work that we learn at Star King and in chaplaincy, right? It's like you're not thinking about what you're going to say, you're not thinking about how you're going to help them, you are just fully hearing them and listening to the point where squinting with your ears was one of the things that I learned too. It's like, just, are you actually like hearing what they're saying, and then also like learning to hear like the subtext in it as well. And that just takes like totally releasing your own agenda of like, and your own assumptions, like of what you think this person, what their background is, what they need, what they want, and just really releasing all of those expectations, which I think is also a very trickster type of energy. Like, it's like being open to the situation completely surprising you, like you said, like that element of surprise. Yeah, it's hard to do though. Oh, it's very hard.
And I love this idea of squinting with your ears. What a beautiful, just the thought process. Like, okay, how do I engage it? Everything in front of me is maybe illusion, but I'm hearing something different. And then you say about the subtext too. Someone could be telling you something, but like really hearing the full context of what's being said. That isn't just words, but also all the other things that are in play there. So I like that idea, and I'll have to incorporate it into some practices for myself as well.
Yeah.
Um,
People will say everything if you just give them a chance, and like if you just can kind of let them let them have their whole process, like they'll get down into it. Like I remember I was working in a locked mental health facility as like part of my first endeavor into mental health care, and just supporting folks in general. And there was this one person who was in some kind of deep psychosis and would just come up to the desk and just like go off and just be talking about all these conspiracy theories and different things. And it would be, and I could see, people who had worked there longer than me, like kind of just having that, fatigue of like, okay, yeah. And like, and I was lucky enough to like be fresh. So I had the energy. So I would just like, just stay engaged, like stay present with him while he was doing it. Right. And eventually, like one time I realized like he's not just like saying random stuff. He's like, he has like needs and things. And like I just remember this one time he's going off about the government. He's going off about all these things. And then slightly in there, he just interjects, yeah, and then also I need a new pair of socks. But then also they're after me and like da da da. And I was like, oh, you need socks. Like, let's get you some socks, homie. Like, come on. And that type of patience and just like releasing my expectations of what I thought. Like, oh, okay, he's just coming up here to, and he was very aggressive too. That was the other part too. It was like, whoa, like you're, but he wasn't being aggressive at me. He's just trying to get his needs met. And that was just like his best way to do it. Right. And so I feel at that particular experience, I feel like set me up to be like, okay, let's just drop my assumptions of what people are, what I think that they're coming at me with, and just be open to anything being possible. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and earlier you said also about this idea of spiritual navigation, which I also thought was a really great sort of idea there. How do you see, so as someone who's sort of seen your own personal life, plus your own psychedelic experiences, plus this chaplaincy world, plus having your ideas around spirituality and tarot and all that, what is the realm? What is spirituality? Like everyone, we always have these ideas. We talk about spirituality. What is spirituality? Sometimes I say it's just what's ever beyond our 3D realm of consciousness, but how do you see it? Is it a place? Can we go somewhere? Can we visit each other there? Like, how do you see spiritual realms?
Yeah. So kind of the foundation of my own spiritual experience and how I understand is I'm a believer in immanent divinity. I believe that I really feel that everything going on within us, without us, our environment, the universe is all part of the divine, is all part of the god, the goddess, the big old thing. We are all it. We are the divine experiencing itself. I think that's like, Alan Watts thing that kind of got into my brain in my baby hippie days. But I really love it and I really believe that. And I think that these realms, especially that we like have more access to when we're on psychedelics or when we're using plant medicine and things like that, um, I think are just sort of a another layer that we can kind of dive into, and then when we are in the psychedelic experience or like a deep meditation or breath work, we can kind of go into another layer on top of what, because we have our senses, right? We have our five senses. We're able to like experience our world around us, right? And then but I do know like there's so many things happening that we can't see, right? Like frequencies and energies and things like that that we can't perceive. But I think that if we can increase our sensitivity and find more stillness and calmness and things like that, and have psychedelic experiences, we can sort of start to access higher levels of um yeah, sensitivity to these energies. It's a very interesting way to be, and honestly I don't think it's for everybody too. I don't think that you know, every I think there's it's a really very popular thing in the world right now to do kind of like psychedelic and spiritual like exploration. I think people are yearning for something else and yearning for that healing so much, but I also think that uh it's not necessary. I don't think it's necessary to like go into spiritual realms to experience like spiritual healing. I think that connecting with the environment, connecting with yourself, connecting with nature is one of the biggest, best types of spirituality that we can have for ourselves. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
great. Yeah, I often think about that too. Is like, you really have to be prepared when you start doing that navigation and make sure you have a good anchor to here, wherever here is, because when you go
Mhm.
out there, where do you return when it's infinite, right? And how do you find your way back to the source, to yourself? And I always have like, I imagine there's some time down the road, you have people like Kalindi out of Detroit and others that have actually tried to do a little bit of a mapping of the spaces, like, and kind of seeing it as like a world out there that we can kind of go to and revisit and sort of gain information and talk to beings and entities and all that kind of thing, which is just again super fascinating because just like you say, what if it is like how do we explore that? How would you even do observable science around something like that? Is it totally beyond what we even can think about, and why even try it in the first place? But I think that's one thing that I think that's fascinating about the psychedelic realm is that it really allows us to have these questions about spirituality in a way that we couldn't if it was just a book type thing. Tom Roberts says, gives armchair mystics and or, spiritualists an opportunity to experience it in real life, kind of thing, and then it changes your perspective a little bit. And so I think being able to navigate those realms then helps us transfer this over to other people with other spiritual experiences that maybe aren't necessarily psychedelically oriented as well.
Yeah, I that is something I kind of always touch on with folks, especially coming from like recreational world into like facilitated assisted psychedelic experiences. Because I was kind of always like I mentored under an underground facilitator one summer and held some space with her in that way, and she asked me, she was like, "So have you ever done your own like guided facilitated experience?" And I was just like, no, but like I have taken all kinds of psychedelics and like all kinds of different places and all different ways and blah 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 blah. Like, and she was like, that's great, that's like, awesome stuff. But she's like, explain to me that when you're in the facilitated session and you have a guide, you have a sitter, you have a person with you who's trained in holding this type of space specifically, you can actually fully let go into that realm and you can fully go into it, because she kind of explained to me, she was like, even if it's just like you and your best friend out in a cabin in the woods and you're just like totally in a super safe like isolated experience, like if you're doing it that way, like you are going to keep one tiny thread, one tiny little toe back in the consensus reality or whatever, as it were. And she was like, with a facilitator, a trained facilitator, you can fully let go and fully go into the experience and go way deeper, than you might have without. Because you have this person who is here, who you have already like negotiated, like all the ways that you want to be held and the way that so you want the experience to be held, and they are going to keep your body safe, they're going to keep the environment safe, and you can just go and explore these realms without having to keep any of that little thread of like, okay, wait, no, but I still have to like, yeah, where am I going to land? Where am I going to come back to? It's like that person's holding that space. So I always like to say that, especially for folks who are maybe interested in doing like a facilitated session, but like they have a lot of their own psychedelic experience as already. I do think it's like really beneficial to try it like once, I think. And yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. It's also interesting how everyone has different types. Like for me personally, I actually find that I hold things back when I'm with somebody that's facilitating or in a session. Whereas if I'm by myself, I'm like, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about like, hey, I'm drooling on the floor. Or do I need, what did I do? Right? Somebody looking at me, did they sigh at the wrong time? And now I'm like, oh, what was I just thinking about? So sometimes I think that kind of that interpersonal world, solo style, though, again, I've been probably like you, quite a few times trying this and making my mistakes. And they say the best way to do risk reduction is to make sure you've broken all the rules once or twice, so you know where not to go, right? So, but there's something about that as well. So I think for both sides, yeah, having someone that's facilitated that can kind of bring you back if need be, or also knowing that sometimes you can kind of explore, but maybe further down the road.
Mhm.
You had some opportunity in Oregon as well to work in the sort of the new sort of psychedelic psilocybin therapy program. Are you still involved with that, or not really so much? Or
Yeah, so I was working with the Cora Center as a site host. So I was kind of like the front door person. The My friends were joking because I loved this job so much. Unfortunately, Cora Center has since closed. And we'll get into that in a second here. But my friends were joking. They were calling me a psychedelic janitor, essentially. Um, but it was really fun. I got to, there's interesting legislature around the legal model here in Oregon where the facilitators themselves are not allowed to actually touch the mushrooms, which is very
so
strange.
weird.
So,
Yeah.
so me, who did not take the $10,000 year-long course, just had a $20 like online certificate. I'm just opening up the safe and pulling out all this products, and I'm just like, la la la, here we go. It was such an honor though, and a really beautiful experience to be able to, yeah, serve the mushrooms to them, and then kind of hold the space for the space holders, as it were, bringing the can just it was just so interesting too. So they'd come out of the session, they'd be like, "We need roses. Can you go to the store? Like, oh, we need chocolate. Like, we need this." And I'm just like, "Okay, yeah, got you." Like, and just like kind of doing the runaround to make sure everything is all like they have everything they need, and then bringing in like a beautiful like plate of fruit at the end of the day, like once like the meat of the ceremony was over, and just coming in and just feeling their glow and being able to be a part of that type of support for them was so awesome. So yeah, unfortunately, they did have to close, and that is due to just the exorbitant overhead and taxes and red tape and things like that. It's really, really hard for these centers and facilitators to stay afloat and stay operational in the way that it is now. And it's unfortunate, and it has also kind of bred into some very strange practices and things that have I've seen go on in the scene for sure. But there are people out there that are really holding the torch and really, really doing good stuff out there in this realm. Even though it's kind of, you know, capitalism has its like little greedy hooks all over it, and it's definitely a difficult terrain to navigate. So yeah.
Yeah, imagine. Yeah, we hear about that a lot from a lot of folks, and I always think because I think you told me this story kind of in one of the classes, and like it was just like so mind-boggling that like the facilitator can't touch the mushrooms, and I was like, and I'm trying to like hammer in my head like, why is that? Is it because are they trying to get the tax issue, because maybe then it's two different things and you're dealing with the mushroom and they're not dealing with the mushroom, so because the 280E you can't sort of write off things where that's something that's schedule one or whatever, or what the whole process is around that. But it's just like it seems like an extra step of regulatory stuff that doesn't really help make it more efficient, or even I mean something about, I mean, I guess you could argue both sides, but something about, the facilitator has the mushrooms, that's the person you're gonna be sitting with, they're coming in, they're offering it to you and that type of thing. But also now that you're also doing that mushroom stuff, but holding space for the facilitator as well, sort of brings it to a larger picture. But I've always been kind of confused by the extra hoops you got to jump through in Oregon, and why it kind of needed to be that way. And unfortunately, that you're seeing them not being as successful. I know there is some movement out there still to try and do decrim on the local levels there, try and allow people to grow gather gift, because I think that's still a felony in Oregon, as far as I understand, being able to grow your own mushrooms or pick them or any of that kind of thing. But it must have been nice to at least to kind of seen what that sort of looks like, what a sort of state regulated model looks like, and unfortunately also seeing some of the downside of the costs that are happening to folks out there.
Yeah, it's well, I want my big the only reason I could think that they would do like the facilitators not touching the mushroom thing is maybe because they were worried that facilitators would be taking the medicine, so it's like kind of just like another like check and balance that like the facilitators sober during the session.
Okay.
But yeah, we see a lot of other hoops. Like there was a whole thing too where facilitators were supposed like not allowed to play musical instruments during their session because somebody got it in their head that if they're playing a guitar or playing a drum, they're not actually paying attention to the status of their participant. And it's just like, it's just a lot of it is obviously written by folks who have not experienced the medicine or have not they don't have their own personal relation to it in any kind of a way, and so there's a lot of more arbitrary like, oh, this is a profit based rule, or this is a money rule for sure, things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how it kind of all goes. I'm starting to see more centers change their model because a lot of The above ground stuff is upwards of, 1,500, 2 grand, 3 grand for these sessions, which is really wild. But then, now knowing what it breaks down to for like all of the different people that I want their cut, it's like, oh, you want to have these legal mushrooms? Great, cool. Yeah, we're definitely going to take our like, the yeah, there's definitely hands that want the money there, and you can kind of really see it. But there's centers that are really changing their models. I'm seeing more like cheaper like levels of entry to have these experiences, and it seems like they're more like kind of churn and burn, like running them through, and then there's also in Ashland, we don't have this in Portland yet, but there's very casual places where they're doing like micro doses, and they're like, it's like a cafe type experience, or they'll have like a concert. And so then everybody, it's funny, everybody has their prep session before this concert or event or this day with a facilitator, and then everybody goes and you can take the medicine there, and they're having like a whole just like nightlife kind of hangout vibe, which I would love to see something like that in Portland too. I think that would be very, I mean, we have that in Portland already, but
And that above ground.
not above ground. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a whole interesting Wild West right now. So
Yeah, I mean, and that was kind of the thing. It was like it was, kind of sold to us like, oh, we'll do this legalization, it'll work this way. But now that is actually causing more sort of innovation in the underground worlds, or the ways to think around the laws and all these types of things. So, to have had maybe decrim and that, we'll see what happens in Colorado with having both of those sides. But I think they're trying to repeal some of the decrim stuff now because, again, the financial incentive of the legalization framework. So the
yeah,
rights are being sort of restricted by the legislatures there, which is unfortunate. So we're gonna have to find it right at some point in time. But as long as we can sort of grow our own, then hopefully we'll be fine on that.
absolutely. Well, and
And
that is
then
why I wanted to go into chaplaincy and become a spiritual, leader and get this kind of accreditation and certification, is to be able to, advocate for sincere religious use and be like, this is a sacrament. This is something that people should, have the divine right to change their consciousness and experiment with it however they want, and so that's kind of my end goal with all of this, is to be able to enforce, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and be an advocate and be a person who can uphold that divine right. We are all allowed to do that, so yeah.
right. Yeah, and I really like that too about the psychedelic child. We spend all this time now teaching mental health practitioners who may never have an experience because of all the things that come in. Sometimes therapists have the most strong mind, so to speak, and like anything that's a little bit out of it, they're like, whoa, they like freak out even a little bit more. So we're training, we've done all the work training the mental health practitioners, but in terms of spiritual practitioners, how can we sort of help people in a spiritual context when it's not just like, oh, I feel less depressed, but oh, I feel less depressed because I had an engagement with an entity that I consider divine, and it showed me this different cosmological path and all this other kind of thing. That's not in the mental health context, right? So you have to be able to speak from a spiritual lens to really sort of understand that, and you still get to the maybe reduction of depression at the end, but in the meantime you're sort of having to follow this different narrative, this different conversation in order to get there and sort of meeting them where they're at. So I'm really excited to see all the good work that's happening there. I know we have about probably less than 10 minutes now, but Rachel has one question. But before we jump into it, I always ask everybody this at the end of the podcast. Um, um, when you sort of see what's going on nationwide, when you see kind of what's going on in the world, and you hear the words decriminalize nature, what does decriminalize nature mean to you?
Oh, it's I think that the name of your podcast here says it all. It's like getting back to the roots, like reclaiming what has always been rightfully ours, our ability to be connected to nature, our ability to can be connected to ourselves, and to do that radical work, of reclaiming our place in the ecosystem, of reclaiming our right to exist, and to experiment, and to live our lives in a liberated, healthy, full way without interference from capitalism. That's really what it comes down to for me.
Uh, yeah, thank you, Ali. Appreciate it. And Rachel, hop it over to you for the question.
So I just had, well, I wanted to add a few questions, but I'm going to keep it to one for now. Hopefully, we'll have other shows in the future, as you're saying, like in terms of different verticals. But I really caught on to you talking about being a performer. I love the idea that you dance with fire. There's so much like symbolic meaning there about being a guide through things that are very intense and difficult as someone who dances with the fire and how you walk into it. That's how I kind of see it. So I read a lot of comic books. And in one of the comic books, not in like V for Vendetta, Alan Moore basically says, let me see if I can quote it properly. I don't want to missay it. Um, Artists use lies to tell the truth. So, yes, I created a lie, but because you believed it, you found something true about yourself. And so, as someone who's a performer, and in a sense, you're like the trickster gods too, you lie in some regards, right? Misrepresent it, which can be considered like, let's say, bad, but it's not. It's just about tricking you into playing to your highest self. That's how I see it. So, do you have maybe a story or a past instance or a performance or something that I think maybe like speaks to, because I feel like performance and dance and the arts is inherently psychedelic. It takes you to that place in your head. I feel like so. I'm wondering if you have like a performance or a routine or any kind of like artistic output that you've done that maybe speaks to like that whole essence of like the artist role and all of this stuff, all this woo woo stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All this woo-woo stuff. Gotta love
Yeah, it's all woo woo
it.
to me.
Really. I was reflecting on, I was noticing recently because I'm been going through some changes in my professional performance life and kind of like reorienting, especially as I'm about to graduate and sort of
Yeah.
figuring out what's next for me and having had accomplished like a lot of my goals that I kind of set out to do when I first came to Portland and started performing as a professional. And I was looking back at like all of the shows that I've been a part of, and that I've written and directed and produced, and they all have this element where there is some character. Often it's me, but it's like sometimes it's other friends that are in the show or whatever, that they have some experience where they totally freak out, they totally lose their mind, and they have to then like the rebuild what they
Mm.
know, or they, and usually that entails some kind of like big dream sequence. Like at one time I was
I
we had
love
a
dream sequences. They're the best.
right. So fun. So I've done some really incredible ones where it's like, transforming into this place, and then they go through the hero's journey through this
Love
like
that.
uncharted territory, weird realms, weird characters, things happening, and then they come out on the other side and they're like, oh my gosh, I get it. Like, yeah, here we go. It's that alchemical transformation
Yeah.
of like the solve and then the coagula, and we're just constantly doing that in our life, right? We're like building up and getting structure, and then life happens and the waves come and crash away the sandcastle, and then you just go back to you just building it up again. And so I think a lot of my performances are based around that arc, that rise and fall of like what we think we know and our structure, and then the dissolving, and then how we can kind of take what's been left and compost it into something new and create something new like that. Um, yeah,
So good. That's so good. What a great answer. I mean, like, what did someone say to me? Like, you can never find yourself. You don't get lost, right? So,
literally that. Yeah.
love it, Allie. All right, back to you, Larry.
And thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. And thank you, Allie, for all this wonderful wisdom today. Is there anything that we kind of haven't touched on that you want to sort of bring into the conversation?
No, I just really appreciate all the work that y'all do at Decriminalize Nature. I think it's just so important and so beautiful, and I'm just really grateful that y'all exist, and that and I'm just grateful for you having me on here today. It's been really nice to chat. Yeah, and nice
Yeah,
to
thank
meet you
you.
too, Rachel.
Yeah, appreciate it. And how, for anyone out there that wants to contact you or maybe see a show you're doing or some way just to kind of chat with you or do psychedelic chaplaincy, how do they reach out to you and find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram is my best way. I'm very active on Instagram. You can DM me there. It's yes, that's Allie on Instagram, and I post often when I'm doing shows and things like that. I think the next place to see me though is going to be at the Oregon Country Fair on WC Field Stage. We're doing the Femme Follies there, and big dream sequence there. They're really big. We got flamingos, we got all kinds of, yeah. It's really good. So that show is going to be super fun. So yeah.
Oh,
That's
yes.
great. And
Yes.
where's it Oregon, or when is Oregon Country Fair for folks
It
that are,
is it's always the second weekend in July. So this year that puts it on July 9th through the 12th, or I guess
Mm-hmm.
it was 10th through the 12th. And so it's a 3-day event. And yeah, highly recommend if you've never been and you're interested in psychedelic culture, especially here on the West Coast. It's one of
Yeah.
the meccas, one of the best places you can just really truly get lost there in a good, beautiful way. So
It's on my bucket list. I haven't been yet, but I definitely like hear
Oh,
about it. And so many people have been like, you have to come, and so
Well,
yeah,
let me know when you're coming, and
yeah,
burn an
yeah.
eight. We can we can.
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ali, for being here and again sharing all your sort of stories and all your sort of lived experience and all the fun things that you've been doing in life and all the very serious things as well. And thank you, Rachel, for being here as well and always giving some good questions and helping us out here. This is the end of season 3, everybody. So we'll be starting season 4 coming up at September. So this is the last show for this until the summertime coming up in the fall. But check us out. We're going to have this podcast on the Spotify and Apple Podcast platforms, etc. And then you can always find us on YouTube Live. We'll have this posted up there as well. We'll have a couple little clips from this coming out in the next probably month or two as well. And we'll send, we'll sort of tag Ali in those as well, so you can check out the Instagram page and everything else. So wonderful. Thank you for being here. Thank you again for Rachel. Thank you everybody for listening. Our next show is going to be season 4 in the fall time with Edward Crow, and that's going to be on September 13th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. So set your calendars for that. Subscribe to our channel, find out some more information, and get the updates. And thank you again, everyone, for listening in. And until next time, tune in, stay rooted, and let's grow together. Have a great day. Bye bye now. Happy Sunday.
bye, everybody.